Footsteps led to an altar, then vanished. Welcome to Fabled Codex. I am your host, Mithrin. Share your location in the comments. I love seeing this community grow. Now, let's step into the mystery. It was upon an afternoon of pitiless chill that Inspector Lestrade presented himself in Baker Street, his thin frame made thinner by the draft at our sitting room door, bearing that expression of dogged worry which, in him, stands for excitement. He warmed his hands at the fire only after Holmes, with a slight motion of his violin bow, indicated that the grate, not the inspector, was the proper object of attention. "You have timed your visit to the bar of a minute," Holmes observed. "Your boots are still speckled with powdered stone, and a faint smear of white grease has found your left cuff. Pray keep to the hearthrug, or Mrs. Hudson will have us both in the dock." Lestrade half smiled at this reception. "I dare say I have not come to be polished, Mr. Holmes," said he. "There is a matter. Lord Wrexham himself is at my heels. He would speak with you. At that name I confess I started." Lord Wrexham was a peer whose engagements in the Home Office had twice crossed my view in the medical journals, and whose stanch philanthropy had set more than one infirmary to rights. He entered as Lestrade spoke, a tall, noble figure sunk by grief into a stoop that did not belong to his years. His hair, white at the temples and iron-gray elsewhere, was swept back in a style that suggested habit rather than vanity. His gloved hands trembled. Yet, when he removed the right glove to greet us, his grip was firm and cool. "Mr. Holmes," said he, "I ask of you what a father asks when the world makes a show of justice but offers him only spectacle. My daughter has disappeared at the very rails of the altar, within a church crowded with witnesses and barred by doors watched on both sides. She vanished, sir, in the sight of God and man." Holmes laid the instrument aside. "Pray sit, Lord Wrexham. You are a man who does not waste words. Where?" "St. Swithin's on the Weald," said Lestrade, answering for him. "City, parish off Gray's Inn Lane. Small, clergy of good reputation. We have the doors, we have the vestry, we have the tower stairs. We have nothing else." Holmes steepled his fingers and regarded the smoke curling from the fire as if it spelled a cipher. "Watson," said he without turning his head, "your hat. We shall require your eyes and your surgeon's nose. Lord Wrexham, give me your facts by the way." Thus we rattled in a hansom through streets that wore the gray of late winter like a garment too often mended, while the peer, with soldierly concision, gave us the outline. Lady Eugenia Wrexham, 23, a face not unknown to society sketches for the benefit of charitable funds, had been to be married that very morning to Captain Edward Markham of the 14th Hussars, lately returned from India. The church had been crowded. Chilly weather had kept folk close in their pews. The verger, in anticipation of damp boots upon the ancient stones, had that morning sprinkled a very fine grit over the central aisle, a powder compounded, as he explained, of whiting and sand to preserve the polish of the flagstones and to prevent accidents. The effect was to receive and retain, in the plainest fashion possible, every footfall along that route. She came in with her father. Lord Wrexham continued in a voice that broke only once, and walked the length of the aisle to the very rails. Her steps were plain to see, delicate and regular, for she had small feet and a habit, from childhood, of turning her right toe in. There she faltered as many brides do. The rector spoke a word of comfort. She smiled faintly. Then, there is no other word, she was gone. "Gone?" cried I. "Good heavens!" "There was a stir," said Lestrade dourly, and a murmur ran through the church such as I have only heard when a verdict goes awry. But gone she was. No one touched her. There was no scream. The groom, a stout young gentleman, leapt forward. The father called her name. I was at the back. I had come on a separate matter, and I pushed to the front expecting a fainting. We looked down. Her footsteps ended at the very lowest step before the chancel rail. There were no more. None to right or left. None backwards. The powder showed everything within 20 yards, and there were no new marks upon it save those made by us afterwards. Holmes's eyes had fixed themselves upon Lord Wrexham's uncovered hand, which still trembled upon the carriage strap. "Forgive me," said he quietly, "but you have a streak of candle wax upon your third finger, and your glove smells faintly of Eucharistic wine. You have been in the sanctuary since." "I have," said the peer. "I could not be kept from it. A trap?" I ventured. "There is no trap," said Lestrade. "We have had men over those stones with rods and lanterns. The vestry door was in plain view and locked within. The tower door was bolted above and below. The windows are small, stained, and leaded. A mouse would think twice." Holmes's nostrils dilated, as they always did at the scent of the impossible. "My dear fellow," he murmured, "the mouse is a philosopher when the cheese is not to his taste. Is the church far?" We drew up at last before a modest, time-worn church that held its ground against the slate sky with the stubbornness of an old soldier. Its tower had a slight lean. Its lich-gate was hung with holly too early for any festival, as if to keep in a warmth the season would not provide. Within, the nave was narrow and dim. The flags of the central aisle did indeed wear a film of dust and whiting that gave them a pale bloom like frost. In that whiteness lay a series of prints so distinct that I could have drawn each buckle and seam, the progress of a woman's feet from the west door to the very approach of the chancel rail. There they ceased. I knelt and saw how the last mark was a little deeper, as if made by a foot that had hesitated and pressed more weight before lifting. The smell of lilied wreaths mingled with something sharper that pricked the nose. Clean, medicinal, almost metallic. Holmes glanced up at me. "Phenol," he murmured. "Not church incense." "Mark it, Watson," Lestrade bristled. "There is carbolic in the vestry for cleaning. We have had much traffic of late with the influenza." Holmes's gaze was already elsewhere. He took from his pocket the little convex lens that is as much a part of him as his pipe, and went upon all fours like a great lean hound. He hummed a phrase from a violin partita, stopped, and plucked at the edge of the kneeling cushion before the rail. A grain of something glittered upon his fingertip. "What is that?" I asked. "Not for your eye yet, old friend." He returned with a faint smile. He replaced it in his pocketbook with a care I had seen him give to banknotes. Then he straightened and surveyed the chancel. A low altar of oak, a fair linen cloth, brass candlesticks, a hymn number-board to the right with its numerals set awry by a single notch, and, this was curious, a smudge upon the altar rail as if some person with graphite on the fingers had grasped it hard. He approached the rail and placed his hand just so. His long fingers closed around the very place. Who held this thus? He asked of no one in particular. "The groom," said Lestrade. He flung himself forward when she vanished and gripped there till I thought the oak would split. He is a man of feeling and, for the moment, little use. Holmes's eyes strayed to the organ loft. The console stood silent, the pipes above like organ stalks of an iron harvest. From the loft a narrow stair twisted into the tower. He lifted his head and sniffed again, less like a hound than a connoisseur before a glass. "There is another odor beneath the carbolic," he murmured. "Orris root and a touch, how curious, of oil of cloves. Your daughter, Lord Wrexham, did she use a particular scent?" "She disdained perfumes," said the peer. "She was a simple girl." "Simple?" Holmes repeated, not as doubt, but as a kind of assent. He moved to the hymn-board, and with a single delicate touch set the skewed numbers straight. The little wooden slip clicked into its notch with a sound far louder in that hush than it had right to be. The verger, a man with whiskers as stiff as brooms, started where he stood by a pillar. "Did you set the grit yourself?" Holmes asked him. "I did, sir." "First thing. Best practice in damp weather. I keeps a barrel of it in the vestry, and the doors. Shut all the morning save to welcome the parties, sir. I stood at the west myself. Mr. Chard, the sexton, was by the south porch, though it was kept barred. You may ask him, we shall," said Holmes. "But first, Watson, your eye to these last impressions. Do you see how the right foot in each is turned inward a trifle? That is not affectation. It is structure. Lady Eugenia's shoes would show the wear upon their outer edges, unless they were new." Lord Wrexham pressed a hand to his brow. "They were new, sir. Specially made at Hoby's in Regent Street. White satin." Holmes raised an eyebrow, not in triumph, but in a kind of patient interest that made me long to be of use. White satin receives every mark. If the soles are still in your possession, they are not, said Lestrade shortly. There are none of her effects to hand. She did not leave so much as a glove. That is untrue, Holmes returned with gentle firmness. She left you a church full of gloves. He turned upon his heel and pointed, not to any garment, but to the wax that had fallen from the left altar candle, a droplet of pale violet hue upon the linen, a thing only visible if one stooped to look along the cloth at the light. Violet wax at a morning wedding is not in the ordinary course. File that beside your carbolic, your orris, and your oil of cloves, Lestrade. Put next to it the grit that shows all and yet shows nothing, the last footfall heavier than its sisters, and the hymn-board off by a single notch. We will see if a pattern comes when we have laid a few more tiles. And my daughter, Lord Wrexham's voice roughened. Mr. Holmes, tell me at least, is she alive? Holmes did not answer at once. His gaze had gone again to the organ loft, to the stair that coiled into shadow, and to the bell rope that hung there, worn smooth in one place and in another newly roughened, as if some hand had taken to it that did not know its use. When he spoke, it was as one who fits a key into a lock without yet turning it. I have seen vanishings, my lord, that were but changes of room and costume, and I have seen deaths that announce themselves with less ceremony than your daughter's smile. I shall not insult you with a guess at this hour, but I will say this. There is in this place less of miracle than of rehearsal. Someone has practiced something here. Lestrade coughed. Practiced what? Holmes's smile was thin. A deception that loves a straight aisle and an audience, Inspector. Come, let us have the vestry, the tower, and the bridegroom's hands. If we are fortunate, they will all tell the same small lie in different voices. Holmes did not wait upon ceremony but passed through the low gate of the rail and slipped behind the altar with the air of a householder who expects to find his own mislaid pocket-knife. I followed, Lestrade at my shoulder, and Lord Wrexham halted where his courage and his reverence collided. The Sanctus bell on its small bracket had been polished lately. I saw a smear upon the brass that the peer could not help but notice, and he shut his eyes as if to shut it from remembrance. The vestry gave at once that mixed odor of damp stone, black cloth, beeswax, and the phenol we had already detected. The verger, proud of his stewardship, pointed out the press of surplices and the locked drawer of plate. Then his prized barrel of Isle Protector stood in a corner with a wooden scoop upon its rim. Holmes dipped 2 fingers lightly, lifted the dust to the light, and let it run in a thread between forefinger and thumb, as a miller might judge his flour. Whiting and sand, the man repeated, eager. A pinch of powdered marble makes a better bloom, sir. I add it, a trick of the trade, safest thing going. Holmes moistened a single grain upon his tongue, then smiled at my inevitable protest. You will allow me my barbarous methods, Watson. The marble is honest enough, but this— He touched the barrel's hoop and brought away a dim sparkle that was not of stone. A child of the theatre has had her hand in your trade, my good fellow. The verger looked blank. Theatre, sir? You have never ground mica to a flake so thin it clings to skin and linen, Holmes murmured. Yet there it is. See how it clings to the creases of my finger. Orris root often carries it, to give a dull face the appearance of light. It is also to be found in certain cheap powders used by chorus women and, more rarely, by gentlemen who must whiten a scar. Lestrade gave a short snort. Scar or no scar, that dust was laid at 8 o'clock. I had a constable watch the door after. Then whoever supplied your dust supplied yesterday's as well, said Holmes. He bent to the vestry table, where a cracked ewer and basin waited with a towel broad as a banner. A small triangle of blotting paper lay half under the basin's lip, as if shifted by a draught. He lifted it with the points of his fingers. A faint crescent of violet ran along one edge like the ghost of a pressed flower. He brought it to my nose. A trace of oil of cloves, said I, and powder, not the powder of church dust. Something scented, and a violet wax drawn away while still soft. Holmes added, noted. He slid it into the pocketbook that had swallowed his earlier glittering grain. A step sounded in the nave, heavy and impatient. Then a man in an undress cavalry frock-coat thrust himself into the vestry with that authority which the recent presence of happiness gives, and grief will not at once dethrone. He had the handsome, ruddy face of a sportsman, a square jaw, and eyes that were at this moment dangerous with bewilderment. The right side of his mouth was a little set, as if against pain. "Captain Markham," Lestrade said, and would have stopped him with a palm. But Holmes was already before the groom, not to block him, but to absorb him whole with a glance that missed nothing and judged less. "Your hand, if you please, Captain." The fellow stared, then held it out. The palm was calloused in the places reins callous them. The forefinger bore a faint gray shadow that a less suspicious eye might have taken for dust, and there was a new abrasion at the base of the thumb, raw and freckled with fibers, as if rope had kissed it roughly. From his breath there rose an unmistakable sweetness that my medical training could never mistake. "Oil of cloves," I said. "Toothache," the captain returned, with a flash of shame like a boy caught with a sweetmeat. I had the devil of a night. I would not alarm Jenny. "I beg your pardon, Lord Wrexham, Lady Eugenia, so I sent for a draught at dawn." It abated towards the service. "The gray upon your finger?" Holmes asked, as one invites a friend to take the last biscuit. "Pencil," the captain said at once. "I wrote," he faltered, "a line only. For my friend and best man, Fitzhugh. He is a clumsy dog with arrangements." Holmes nodded as if satisfied with a matter that had not satisfied him at all. "You rang the bell, like a madman," Markham said hoarsely. "It did not bring her back. It seldom does," Holmes murmured. "You gripped the altar rail, and you brushed the candle. The violet upon your cuff is eloquent, but it does not speak of guilt." He raised his eyes. "Tell me of your bride's right foot," Markham blinked. "The right? She tucked it in from childhood. Turned a trifle inward. We teased her. She would stamp it like a general when teased." Holmes allowed himself the lightest smile, then turned his back on the captain so abruptly that Lestrade half lifted a hand to restrain him. In 3 strides he was again at the chancel step where the last print lay heavier than the rest. He did not touch the stone. Instead, he sank upon one knee and put his ear, not his eye, within a hand's breadth of the joint between 2 flags. A moment, and a very small thing happened. He wet a finger and held it in the air like a mariner searching for wind. The flame of the nearest candle made a childhood game of it by leaning towards him and away again. "A draught," he said softly. "Not from the west door, not from the tower." From beneath, Lestrade swore under his breath, "We have been over the Undercroft." "You have been under the tower," Holmes returned without heat. "This is beneath the step. There is an old London trick of laying 2 stones upon a bed of sand so fine that a tap in the right place will make one float a hair's breadth. It is much practiced by those who give themselves to practices. But observe, if there were such a thing here, the grit would surely betray it, for the motion would shake a ring of powder loose from the joint. There is no ring. Therefore, if there is an opening, it is not by lifting. It is by slide." The verger's protest died at his lips as Holmes's long forefinger traced the margin of the step once, twice, then stopped upon a point where the whiting was caught in a sharp line, not the soft drift that the rest of the joint showed. He did not prize at it. He stood. If one wished to slide a stone, one would choose a moment when all eyes are kindly fixed upon the bride's face and all ears upon the rector's words. One would wish for a cue, numbers upon a board, set 1 notch awry, and a bell rope newly roughened might serve those who have rehearsed. "Your hymn board, Mr. Verger, who sets it?" "The organist, sir, Mr. Venn. He's a stickler. He were here last night practicing voluntaries for the ceremony, and the candles. From a box sent on account of the florist, sir. We've a regular chandlery, but these were finer. Violet, which is not to my taste of a morning, but the ladies' women insisted." Holmes's eyelids lowered. "The women? Name me one." "Miss Lydia Armitage," said Lord Wrexham, mastering himself with an effort. "My niece. She has been much with Eugenia. She knew her wishes. She wears orris, Holmes said to me as if we discussed meteorology. "And someone about her, if not she, favors a powder that leaves mica on a man's glove." Markham flamed. "Sir!" Holmes's hand, dropped behind him, touched air in a gesture I had learned meant peace. "I accuse no one. I gather a bouquet of small, stubborn facts. We shall see presently which of them will not live in the same water." He asked then for the tower stair, and we mounted the spiral, the worn treads cupping the foot like old palms. At the landing where the rope hung, he paused to study the frayed run that had rasped Markham's skin, then peered through the narrow slit that gave upon the nave. From that vantage the chancel step was a picture card. The white bloom of powder, the arrested footfall, the dark ribbon of rail. He remained motionless so long that I heard in the silence the slow breath of Lord Wrexham like the sea in a shell. When he moved, it was only to descend. He stood once more upon the aisle, looked down its length as if laying a ruler upon it, and said in the mildest tone, "Lestrade, be good enough to place a constable at each door, and another within the vestry, not to hinder, but to observe. No one touches the hymn-board. No one dusts the rail. I desire this church to think aloud for an hour, and we, Lestrade demanded. "We shall pay our respects to Hoby in Regent Street for a word upon souls and edges," Holmes answered, "and to Mr. Venn for a word upon voluntaries and the human ear. And if Miss Armitage is at home, to ask her whether she prefers violet at morning." He looked once at Lord Wrexham with a quietness that, in him, was as near to pity as I had ever seen. "I do not think your daughter left this place as the world thinks people leave places, my lord. I think she was removed from sight as a conjurer removes a coin, by making us watch the wrong hand. We must find the hand." He took up his stick, touched my sleeve, and with that small, eager forward inclination of the head which meant the chase had begun, led the way into the London afternoon. The hansom bore us first to Regent Street, where Hoby's discreet bow window displayed nothing so vulgar as a price, and where the smell within was that mingled perfume of good leather, French polish, and fastidious industry which always gives me the impression of an operating theatre for the feet. A foreman of grave aspect received Holmes as an old acquaintance, for my companion has a knack of making tradesmen feel their craft is a science and therefore noble. "Lady Eugenia Wrexham," Holmes said in the tone of a man ordering a pair of shoelaces and expecting the world. White satin, narrow last, inner right edge subtly reinforced against a habitual inward turn. The foreman neither started nor preened. "Quite so, sir. A pleasing foot. We fitted her thrice. The soles, at the lady's especial request, were left in natural leather, not inked, with a whisper of pumice, so she might feel the floor beneath her. A bride likes to be sure of herself." Holmes leaned with idle hands upon the glass which told me he was at his keenest. "And collected when?" "Yesterday, sir, late afternoon. The lady came herself, no maid, very courteous. We had earlier a curious call." Holmes did not look at him. He let the pause do it. Curious. A woman, modestly veiled. She said she was the lady's dresser, and must see that the soles would not slip upon church flags. She asked what we advised. I told her what I would tell any sensible person. A breath of whiting, marble dust, lightly applied, gives a grip and leaves nothing that cannot be shaken out. She had a faint fragrance, orris if I know anything of ladies, and a speckle of something bright upon her glove. I thought of a music-hall dresser. She inquired whether a second pair might be made against mishap. I answered we had no time. She thanked me, very soft, and went. When the lady herself arrived some hours later, she laughed at the notion of slipping and said she would not mince like a postulant. She stamped, like a child, sir, and the right toe turned in. Holmes's eyes smiled. "You have a good memory for feet and fancies both. One more trifle. Do your soles bear any mark that would show upon powder?" The foreman's professional pride allowed a thin beam of warmth. "A Hoby sole has a fine diagonal tool mark near the waist, sir. It does not touch the tread. A connoisseur might see it in dust, but few policemen would." Holmes thanked him with that grave courtesy which in him meant value received, and we were off again, the wheels purling along the wet, pale edge of the curb. He said nothing until we drew up in a quieter street near Bloomsbury, where a narrow brass plate announced Mr. Edwin Venn, professor of music, beneath a bell pull as exact as a metronome. Venn opened to us in person, a tall, sallow man with careful hair and a mouth pinched by self-command. The room behind him was lined with scores. A small harmonium stood by the window. Upon it a copy of Mendelssohn open at a page fretted with pencil. The air held a dry, agreeable trace of Rosine. "Mr. Venn," Holmes said, "I admire a man who sets his hymn numbers true. Last night you practiced for the ceremony. Did you alter the board this morning?" "I did, Mr. Holmes. My friend is Dr. Watson. And did you alter it again?" "I did not," Venn returned with a trace of offense. "The board stood at 199 and 326. I selected them myself to suit the rector's taste. Midway through the service, I observed that 326 read 325. I suppose the verger had blundered, yet the verger never blunders. I climbed afterwards and found the slip pushed by a hair's breadth. I set it right. If there is mischief there, it was not of my contriving." "You received a note this morning," Holmes said as one who remarks on the weather, sealed with a violet wax that smudges if drawn before it cools. It suggested a voluntary of substance at the bride's approach. Venn drew himself up. Then, seeing that denial would only lower him, he fetched from a desk a small card, the common kind a tradesman leaves. Upon it, in a neat, somewhat feminine hand, was written, "If you please, sir, favor a bright Mendelssohn as the bride advances. It settles the nerves." The seal, still hanging by a ragged half, had indeed been violet. "I had played," Venn said stiffly. "I heard, this will sound foolish, a small, contrary sound beneath the music, as if a stone knew a tune of its own. It may have been my nerves." Holmes's attention flicked to the harmonium's keys and away. "Your nerves are not of the sort that imagine notes, Mr. Venn. Tell me, last night while you practiced, who else was in the church?" "The florist's men came and went," said Venn, "and a young lady, Miss Armitage, spoke with the rector. She smelt faintly of orris. Many ladies do. A man with a scar upon the jaw, ill-shaven, carried in a parcel for the verger. I took him for a jobbing porter. He had that white powder about his cuffs one sees on scene-shifters. There was also an odd sweetness, cloves in the air, though that may have come upon someone's breath. I am not given to cloying scents." We left him with his rectitude unruffled and drove to Lord Wrexham's house in Brook Street, where Miss Lydia Armitage received us in a morning room that made a little garden out of winter with bowls of violets and ferns. She was a handsome young woman of a type I have seen in good families, capable, lightly ironical, the mouth too ready to control a tremor by pressing itself. When she rose, the air about her carried the faint, powder-dry ghost of orris. On the table beside her lay a small hand mirror. Upon its ebon back a dusting of something that caught the light in pinpoints like frost. "You have questions, Mr. Holmes," she said before he had framed them. "Ask them outright. We women do better with a clean cut." "You arranged the candles?" Holmes answered with the same frankness. "A box came said to be from the florist. Their wax was violet." "Who insisted?" "I did," Miss Armitage returned, chin a fraction higher. Eugenia disliked the yellow of cheap wax. "Violet is at least a color. If I have offended the rubric, you must take it up with me and not the verger. I chose the ribbons, too. Are these crimes?" "There are few crimes and many preliminaries," Holmes said, not discourteously. "You were in the church last night, I was." The rector wished for a rehearsal of the entrance. I walked the aisle for her. She was fatigued and sent me instead. There is no sin in pretending happiness for an hour. You walked from the west door to the rail. To within a pace, Miss Armitage said evenly, and stopped. I had not the courage to kneel where she was to kneel. Holmes's gaze touched the hand mirror, the faint twinkle upon it, the violet in the bowls, and came back with an odd gentleness. "Did you send a note to Mr. Venn?" "I did not. I cannot write a musician into courage. I barely keep my own. Your maid favors a powder that leaves brightness on the glove." "My maid is from the theater," said Miss Armitage after the lightest pause. "She came to me from a cousin in Drury Lane. If there is glamour on her sleeves, it is not my doing. Captain Markham has a tooth that aches. We have all smelt his clove. Is there anything else you would have me confess, Mr. Holmes? That I envied my cousin? I did not. I am too proud to envy." Holmes bowed, and if he had thoughts, he pocketed them as he had pocketed the glitter at the rail. In the hall, he touched my arm. The theater gives us two gifts, the habit of rehearsal and the patience for misdirection. We have seen both. Come, Watson. The church must tell us how it was taught to lie. Dusk made a gray chapel of St. Swithin's when we reached it again. Lestrade's men, stolid at the doors, nodded us in. The nave's pallor had deepened. The powder on the aisle took the color of ash. Holmes went at once to the chancel step and, kneeling, produced from his pocket a length of gut such as he uses to restring his violin. He passed it along the joint with a lover's care, paying out an inch at a time, listening with his fingertips. At one place not a yard from the last delicate footprint, the thread met nothing for the width of a straw and then sang against stone again. "There," he said, not above a whisper, and laid his palm flat, then pressed. The pressure was no more than a surgeon gives to test a pulse. Somewhere under us the air sighed. A faint draught rose and brushed my face. It carried with it the ghost of cold and carbolic and, beyond those, a breath of earth. You hear it, Watson. A space that waits to be told its part. He withdrew his hand and the sigh ceased. If one slides a stone by a hair and lets the bride stand where no stone is, one does not drop her. One hands her to darkness as a gentleman hands a lady to a stair. He stood, and the lean, bright look came into his face that means a snare is shaping itself behind his eyes. We will make the stone speak tonight. Lestrade must bring the groom, the organist, and the verger. And Miss Armitage, if she will come, pride is as instructive as guilt. He turned once towards the bell-rope and the hymn-board with its numbers now fast, as if to commend them for their honesty. Then he said in the mildest way, "There are notes enough in this place. Let us choose one they have not rehearsed." Holmes' manner, when he determined upon an experiment, was that of a chemist arranging his vials? Precise, patient, never hurried, but with a fire beneath that I, who knew him best, could always feel. He spoke little on our return journey, though the rattle of the hansom gave him ample excuse for silence. His eyes, half closed, saw not the London twilight, but, I knew, the hidden square of stone at St. Swithin's that had breathed upon his cheek. When we re-entered the church, Lestrade was pacing the nave like a sentinel condemned to his own duty. He approached with his usual mixture of suspicion and resignation, but there was a gleam of interest under his lids. "Well, Mr. Holmes, we have kept the place as you asked. Your constables may not understand hymn-boards, but they can keep their eyes open." "Excellent," Holmes replied. "Did any soul enter?" "None but us," said Lestrade, "and the groom once, to rage at the air. He is near to madness. I held him back by force." Holmes considered this without comment. The verger, the captain, Mr. Venn, and Miss Armitage were summoned, each by separate messenger, and we arranged them in the cold nave beneath the dim lamps. The vast space magnified every cough, every restless step, until the air itself seemed restless. Lord Wrexham had joined us also, drawn by grief to any place where hope might breathe. He stood near the chancel rail, his tall frame bowed, his hands clasped as though in some private litany. Holmes gestured lightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I do not call you here to accuse, but to listen. This church has been made to speak a falsehood. I would have it speak truth." He stepped to the chancel step, and again pressed his palm upon the joint. A breath, colder than the nave, rose faintly. Markham gave a hoarse cry and lurched forward, but Holmes checked him with an upraised hand. "Not yet, Captain. If we blunder, we may seal what we seek." He drew from his coat a length of chalk, and with swift movements marked a square about the treacherous stone, its outline scarcely larger than a coffin's lid. He then handed me his stick. "Watson, a surgeon's hand, if you please. Tap here, lightly." I obeyed, striking the corner with a modest rap. To my astonishment, the stone seemed to quiver. The sound was not the dull ring of masonry, but a hollow note, almost musical. The verger gasped. "I swear by the saints, sir, I never—" "Peace," Holmes said, his voice a mere thread. He crouched and ran the violin string again through the margin, seeking its catch. At last he stopped and pressed at a point half hidden by the final footprint. With the faintest groan, as though the church itself lamented, the stone slid back upon some unseen groove, revealing beneath a dark aperture large enough for a human form. All drew breath together. Lestrade muttered something not in the prayer book. Markham sprang forward, but Holmes seized his sleeve. "Gently, Captain. Would you fling yourself into an unmeasured depth? A lantern, if you please." The verger, pale as wax, brought one. Holmes lowered it into the opening by its handle. It showed a narrow stair of stone descending into blackness, and at its foot a flagged passage that turned away beneath the chancel. The draught that rose bore the unmistakable chill of earth long sealed, mixed with the pungent ghost of carbolic. "There," Holmes murmured, "is your miracle." A passage prepared, perhaps centuries ago, for other purposes. Yesterday it rehearsed its part. Today it played. He withdrew the lantern and closed the stone again with one deft movement. When it settled into place, the seam all but vanished. The silence that followed was like the pause before a verdict. Then Markham burst out, so she was carried off, spirited away like a stage trick. Who dared take her from me? Holmes turned his gaze upon him, level and unflinching. That, sir, is the question. We know the method. We must learn the hand that guided it. The trap does not set itself. It requires knowledge of the stone, courage to tamper with holy ground, and a signal that all eyes should be elsewhere. He looked toward Miss Armitage, who met his eyes with a steadiness almost defiant. The hymn-board, the voluntary, the candles, all parts of a rehearsal, not a ceremony. And somewhere within it, a hand that has practiced the art of concealment. Lestrade grumbled. But why? What use to carry off a lady at the altar? Holmes gave a thin smile. Why is the last thing we answer, Inspector. First the how, then the who. He stooped and touched again the faint grit along the seam. Orris, mica, violet wax, oil of cloves, each a small note in the chord. When the chord resolves, we shall have our culprit. Lord Wrexham stepped forward, his voice shaking. Mr. Holmes, is my child alive? Holmes looked into the dark mouth of the passage as though it might answer. My lord, I will not deal in phantoms. I see evidence of preparation, not of death. Until we know more, hope is not only possible but reasonable. He straightened and turned briskly to Lestrade. Inspector, postmen at both ends of this passage if you can find the far exit. It will not open here alone. Watson, you and I shall pay a call upon the theater district this night. Powder and mica leave their trail more plainly there than in any church. Miss Armitage's lips parted as if to speak, but she closed them again, her color high. Captain Markham clenched his fists till the knuckles showed white. Mr. Venn adjusted his cuffs with nervous exactitude, and the verger crossed himself furtively. Holmes gathered his coat about him. The trap has shown its jaws, he said. Now let us see who baited it. And with that he strode to the west door, the draught of the hidden passage still whispering at our backs like a secret half-spoken. We turned our faces east and took to foot where the press of vehicles made faster progress an illusion. Holmes did not waste the walk. He halted twice, once at a chemist's off Holborn where he stepped in and inquired as to oil of cloves purchased that morning by a gentleman in cavalry undress. The proprietor, who knew the look of a commission as well as a druggist may, produced his ledger with alacrity. Captain Markham, said Holmes when we rejoined the pavement, 6pence for clove. Laudanum refused. A simple pain, then. He wished to be clear in the head. That removes one cloud and leaves the sky otherwise overcast. Our second pause was at a little stationer's whose window made a modest show of wafers, sealing wax, and stamped cards. Violet wax? Holmes asked lightly. The woman behind the counter, all pins and prudence, showed 3 shades and volunteered that the darker was favored by actresses for billet doux. It smudged if one were impatient. A lady's maid purchased a stick last night near closing and a packet of blank trade cards. She paid with a shilling stamped to the year 72. which our prudent friend remembered because it would not lie flat. Holmes's eyebrow tilted. "We may yet find work for that shilling, Watson." Drury Lane received us with its peculiar breath of old paint, stale flowers, gas, and human hope. Holmes threaded its tributaries as if the lanes had been traced in his memory. We stopped at a narrow shop where wigs on disembodied heads stared at the street with the melancholy of exiled princes. A bell tinkled us into the presence of Mrs. Netherby, who, having powdered half the chorus of London in her time, had the air of a dowager among phantoms. We are in want of a powder that leaves a hint of sparkle, Holmes told her as if he contemplated an amateur performance. Orris base, like a flake so thin it clings on silk. Mrs. Netherby named it as one who baptizes. Artemis pearl, sir, a vanity of the younger set. I sell it to girls who wish to be moons, and to those who would appear not to have sat up crying. Is the lady pale or blotched? She is invisible. Holmes returned so gravely that the good woman only nodded. Who bought of you last night late? My book may not speak names, she said, producing it in the same movement. For London's trades preserve their proprieties as opera preserves its scandal. There, 10 of the clock, Artemis pearl, small pot, plus 2 sticks of violet wax, the very shade the Adelphi favors for tableau more. The buyer gave her address as Miss Armitage, Brook Street, but sent a maid. A neat girl with a stage step, poor thing, knees free, toes inward like a tired dancer's. She had a man with her to carry for her, a porter by the whiskers and the cap, with a turn to his jaw as if a surgeon had once meddled there and left it stubborn. He smelt of hemp and carpentry. They paid in coin as flat as my palm and as honest. Sir. Holmes made her a small bow as if she had sung a cadenza to his taste, and we took the shortcut to the Corinthian Theatre, a house where the stage door gathers as much biography in an evening as the court circular prints in a week. The stage manager received us in a fury of order, with call-sheets pinned like battle plans and a carpenter beating time on a loose tread. "We seek a scene-shifter with a scar upon his jaw," said Holmes. "He borrowed a brace and wedges yesterday and had cause to be near a church." "You seek Carter," returned the manager without enthusiasm. "He has more knack than character. He borrowed, as you say, and returned them with a gratefulness that hurt my conscience. He asked queer questions about balancing a heavy trap so a lady might not jar. I told him a lady had better sing on the boards than under them. He laughed with half his mouth. If he is for mischief, I warn you he has not brains to command it alone." Holmes's glance sharpened by a hair. "Alone? Then whose brains?" The manager lifted his shoulders. "The theater breeds lieutenants and seldom generals. Carter keeps company with a maid from a good house, thinks it lifts him, but a man does not learn a church's belly from powdering a lady. Ask your vergers and your old masons. The stage door lad in a ragged coat slung himself off a barrow with the ease of a cat and would have vanished but for Holmes's hand descending upon his collar with surprising delicacy. "Wiggins," said Holmes, "I require a bird that flies between Brook Street and Drury Lane, carrying powder one way and money another. There is a man with a jaw he carries like a grievance. He smells of hemp. Bring me his roost before midnight. A shilling now, and another if your news is dressed and combed." The boy's grin showed a respectable hunger. He was gone before the shilling had found all his fingers. We had scarce reached the corner when a constable, panting and powdered in his own fashion by the London fog, thrust a folded paper into Lestrade's hand where he waited by the curb. For the inspector, with that dogged sense of being outpaced which Holmes always woke in him, had attached himself to our heels since the church. "From St. Swithin's," he said shortly, breaking the seal. "My sergeant under the chancel found what he calls a rabbit run. The passage takes a turn under the north transept, drops 3 steps, and ends at a door bricked once and later freed, which opens into a coal cellar of the house that backs upon the churchyard, number 4. Bridewell Mews. The coal merchant swears he found the door bolted this morning that stood free last night. There are marks of a barrow wheel and a cab's back run against the stones. No prints. The floor is swept like a housewife's conscience." Holmes's eyes had that faraway glitter I had seen when a difficult compound clears in the retort. A mews, Watson. A sanctuary for disappearances and for debts. We will borrow the coal merchant's conscience and see where it forgot to sweep. Bridewell Mews lies like an afterthought behind the sober fronts of the parish. We found number 4 with its yard sour of coal and horse. A girl with red hands stared until Lestrade's warrant cooled her curiosity. In the cellar, a door of ancient oak showed a new bolt and a smear of violet near the staple. Holmes crouched, lifted a splinter that clung there, and smiled without mirth. Wax answers better than men do when one asks what touched it last. See, Watson, the faintest grain of whiting in the smear, and a thread, no, 2, of white satin too delicate for a housemaid's cap. He let them lie where they were and turned to the yard. The stone bore 2 half-moons of iron left by a cab's wheel kissing the curb. The kiss knew enough to blush still where rain had not washed the soot back. He measured with his eye the angle to the lane. The cabman backed thus, he murmured, took his lady where a gentleman would not be seen to take one, and drove out by the lower arch to Holborn, where a man with a tooth he wishes to quiet would not hear pursuit for the noise. Lestrade looked almost eagerly belligerent. And where did he go from Holborn, Mr. Holmes? Where the smell of orris offends no one, Holmes returned. To lodgings taken under a name too modest for the company it keeps, or to a private door where a lady may change into being no one, or— He touched with his stick the barrow track that crossed the yard, its twin rims faint in the damp, one wider than the other by a finger's breadth. That is not a coal barrow. It is a theater handcart with a lame wheel. There is a chip of pearl varnish on the rim. Our carter returns. A quick tapping as of a bird upon glass sounded at the yard gate. Wiggins's narrow face peered through. We closed on him, and he held out, with the solemnity of an altar boy, a pasteboard ticket and a scrap of paper grubby with haste. Carter roosts over an alehouse called the Violet Flask in 7 Dials, he announced with pride. He keeps company with a maid as wears good boots and says, "My lady," when she's cross. He spent new coin at supper and showed a man a shilling that lay like it were tired. The scrap. The landlord swept it from under Carter's elbow. It smells like flowers and doctors. Holmes took the scrap between finger and thumb as though it might sing. It was a fragment of a note on a cheap card, the corner only, with the loop of a letter and the smear of violet wax. The loop had that finical turn I had seen on the organist's card. He held it to his nose and then smiled, very slightly. Orris, cloves, and a ghost of phenol. The same triad binds our little symphony, Watson. We shall go to the Violet Flask and request of Mr. Carter a matinee in which he will rehearse for us a trap not of boards, but of the tongue. He looked up at the gray square of sky over the mews as if it were the roof of a theater, and we the audience waiting upon the overture. Time, he said softly, is the cruelest stage manager. If the curtain has not fallen, it will not do so while we are in the pit. Come, before the lamps are lit. The Violet Flask sat deep in the tangle of 7 Dials, its door sagging under the weight of smoke and quarrel that seemed bred in its walls. A painted sign above showed a crude wine jar daubed in purple, half washed away by rain. Inside, the air was thick with spilled gin, sour tobacco, and the heat of too many bodies pressed into too little space. Holmes slipped through the crowd with the unhurried grace of one who knows exactly where he must arrive, and Lestrade, Watson, and I followed close lest we lose him in the fog of voices. At a corner table beneath a lamp blackened with flies sat a man whose jaw carried the telltale welt of an old knife wound. His cap was drawn low, his fingers thick with grime, and before him stood a pewter pot nearly drained. Beside him perched a girl of quick eyes and neat boots, her apron too clean for the company she kept. She laughed too readily at his words, but her glance, when it darted aside, carried a wariness that belied her gaiety. The scarred man was Carter, and his maid was the very same stage-trained servant Miss Armitage had admitted into her household. Holmes beckoned Wiggins, who hovered near the doorway like a shadow half attached to the street. "Fetch the landlord softly. Say Mr. Carter's reckoning is paid. A word in his ear will keep the fellow seated." The boy vanished, and in a moment the landlord, greasy apron tied askew, lumbered forward and muttered something in Carter's ear that earned him a grunt of satisfaction. The pewter was refilled. Carter leaned back, smug in his leisure. Holmes slid into the bench opposite as naturally as if he had been expected. His long fingers toyed with the stem of an empty glass. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," he said gently. "A night for reminiscence. Do you remember the scent of phenol under a church step?" The man's head jerked up, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know what you're at, mister. No." Holmes's tone was courteous, almost tender. "Then you will not recall the wheel of your handcart, lame by a finger's breadth, cutting its signature in the yard of Bridewell Mews? Nor the pearl varnish it left, nor the satin thread it carried away upon a splinter of bolt?" The girl stiffened. Carter growled. "You've no proof? You're some busybody with a long tongue." Holmes's smile held no warmth. "Proof is a shy animal, Mr. Carter. It does not come when whistled, but it leaves tracks. Yours run from Drury Lane to St. Swithin's, and they carry a lady. The question is, where did you set her down?" Carter slammed his hand upon the table, but Lestrade stepped forward with his badge glinting in the smoky light. "Careful, Carter. A blow here is jail tomorrow. Better to answer straight." The maid's voice came suddenly, low but urgent. "Don't, Will. They'll drag you for it." He glanced at her, and in that glance I saw the measure of his weakness. Holmes saw it too and leaned slightly forward. "She speaks wisely. Your part was labor, not design. There is a greater hand above yours, one that pays in shillings stamped flat and sealed notes that smell of orris. Tell me the name, and you may yet keep your freedom." The man's jaw worked like a dog's chewing a bone too hard. "I did naught but lift a stone," he muttered. "It were ready for me. I'd not the brains to set it. They told me she'd be safe, that it were but to keep her hid till the right time. I swear it, I never touched her harm." Holmes's eyes did not blink. "Who told you?" Carter spat upon the floor and wiped his mouth. "A lady's maid come through the lane. Said her mistress wanted the ground kept quiet. She paid me through another, scarce spoke to me herself. The mistress were tall, dark hair, eyes to freeze you. Called herself Lydia. That's all I know." The name struck the table like a gavel. "Miss Armitage," I breathed. The girl at his side trembled and whispered, "You fool." Holmes raised a hand for silence. "It will not do to rush." Miss Armitage rehearsed the steps, chose the candles, and set the hymn-board askew. Yet we have not the motive, only the means. "Carter, where is the lady now?" He shifted, uneasy. I took her through the run, up to the cab at the Mews. There were two men waiting. One had the look of a soldier, the other a clerk. They bundled her, quiet as a lamb, into the cab. I swear I never saw her after. They paid me at the flask with coin enough to blind me. He shoved a hand into his pocket and flung down a shilling that lay indeed as if tired, the date of 72 glinting dully. Holmes's long fingers closed over it. "The coin may rest," he said. "It has served its master well enough." He rose, his eyes burning with that inward flame I knew too well. "Inspector, keep Carter in your net, but gently. He is a tool, not a brain. The brain we must visit tonight, before she has leisure to vanish a second time." "Miss Armitage," I whispered, half in disbelief. Holmes nodded once. "Pride makes fine scaffolding for envy, Watson." She walked the aisle for her cousin and tasted another's day of triumph. She set her hand to wax and powder and rehearsed a miracle. But we must not confront too soon. A single misstep and she will deny till doomsday. Better to show her the coin, the wax, the thread, and let her condemn herself. The cabman who carried them from Bridewell is our missing witness. Find him, and we hold the rope. He turned to the maid who sat white-faced, her neat boots tapping the floor. "You, child, will come with us. You have lied enough for wages. Tonight you shall tell truth for your mistress's sake, if not your own." She bowed her head, defeated. Lestrade signaled his men, and Carter was led away, grumbling but cowed. Outside, the fog had thickened until the lamps were but smears of pale fire. Holmes drew his coat tighter and spoke softly. "We tread upon delicate boards, Watson. One false note, and the play collapses. But the pattern sharpens. Orris, violet, mica, cloves, and now pride, each a string upon which the tune is played. Tomorrow at Brook Street, we shall hear it struck to its last chord. Until then, let us keep silence, for the night has ears. The fog lay heavy in Brook Street when we called the following morning, muffling the lamps and lending the houses the look of mausoleums. Holmes strode at my side, his eyes alight with the peculiar calm that preceded his most daring movements. Lestrade joined us from the corner, his expression dour yet tinged with anticipation. At Lord Wrexham's door, we were shown not into the drawing-room but into a small library, where the peer awaited us with hollow eyes, and Miss Armitage stood, upright and proud at the far end of the room. She greeted us with courtesy, though her lips were set. "You return with haste, Mr. Holmes. Have you discovered a miracle beneath the stones?" Holmes inclined his head. "A miracle, madam, but one rehearsed too well to belong to heaven." He laid upon the table the tired shilling, the fragment of card with violet wax, and the tiny satin threads. "These," he said softly, "are the voice of your rehearsal. Do you deny they are yours?" Her color rose. "These are trinkets collected by men who see plots in shadows. A shilling, a scrap, a thread. Would you condemn a woman upon such trifles?" Holmes's gaze never wavered. "I condemn no one. I ask only what pride will confess when cornered. You rehearsed the steps in the church. You chose the violet candles. You sent a maid to purchase powders more suited to a stage than an altar. And you wrote to the organist with a seal too hasty to dry. Shall we speak of Carter, who lifted the stone at your bidding?" She laughed, but the sound rang brittle. "A laborer's tale. He would sell his mother for gin." "Just so," Holmes replied, "and for that reason I discount half his words. Yet the other half matched too closely the facts I already possessed." He glanced at Lord Wrexham, whose hands trembled upon the arm of his chair. "My lord, the plot to remove your daughter was no common abduction. It was contrived within your own household." The peer started as though struck. Miss Armitage lifted her chin. "You presume much. What proof do you hold that Lady Eugenia is not herself complicit? She may have wearied of her groom, may have fled of her own will." Holmes's voice was level as steel. Had she fled, the prince would have shown her return, and the trap beneath the step would not have sighed of carbolic and dust. "No, Miss Armitage. She was guided into darkness by those who envied her place. Pride will play at generosity until the hour it is asked to yield. Then it strikes." At that, Captain Markham burst from the adjoining room where he had evidently been listening. His face was pale and haggard, his hands clenched. "Speak plain, Holmes. Do you accuse this lady of stealing my bride?" Holmes raised a restraining hand. "Accuse? No, I unveil a pattern. The pattern shows her hand in preparation, but the final movement belongs to others. 2 men received Lady Eugenia into a cab in Bridewell Mews. Until we named them, the web remains half-spun. Miss Armitage's eyes flickered, only for a heartbeat, but it was enough. Holmes's tone softened. "You did not strike at her, Miss Armitage. You prepared the stage, but when the curtain fell, others claimed the part. The maid at your side is already weary of her lies. Will you let her speak in your stead?" The girl, who had been brought by Lestrade, gave a strangled sob. "I only carried what she told me. Powder, wax, the note for the organist, it were not my plan. But the men. Oh, sir, I never thought they'd carry her away so rough." Lord Wrexham rose with a cry, but Holmes stepped between them. "Enough. The girl is but an instrument. The truth lies elsewhere." He turned abruptly to Lestrade. "Inspector, we must find the cabman who drove from Bridewell." Carter named him, though not by title. "Scarred jaw, the soldier's gait. A deserter, perhaps, hiding in plain sight. With him lies the thread to the lair." Lestrade grumbled, but signaled assent. "And if we find him?" Holmes's eyes glinted. "Then we shall know whether Lady Eugenia is prisoner, pawn, or prize." He faced Miss Armitage once more. "Until then, madam, I counsel silence. The coin, the wax, the thread, all speak already." She did not answer, but her hand closed so tightly upon the back of her chair that the knuckles showed white. Lord Wrexham's face was ashen. Markham turned away with a groan, his fury battling despair. Holmes touched my sleeve lightly. "Come, Watson. The muse will tell us what pride has left unsaid." As we left the house, the fog clung colder than before, muffling the wheels of the waiting cab. Holmes settled into the seat, his gaze far off yet fixed. "Do you perceive it, Watson? Pride rehearses, envy arranges, but the true hand lies in shadows. The cabman is our next page. If we can turn it before the ink dries, we may yet save the lady from vanishing entirely into darkness." I shivered, though not from the chill, for I saw in Holmes's face that rarest of expressions, not triumph nor even anticipation, but a grave resolve that told me the stakes were higher than any of us dared yet name. The cab that bore us away rattled eastward through the fog, its wheels hissing upon wet stones. Holmes sat with his long hands folded, his eyes fixed upon nothing, while Lestrade muttered beside him like a man rehearsing objections that never reached coherence. At last Holmes spoke, his voice no more than a thread. "The cabman is our compass, Watson. Find him, and the needle will point." We turned into the crooked vein of Drury Lane once more, and there Holmes alighted with sudden energy. He drew me into a narrow yard where half a dozen cabs stood idle, their horses steaming in the cold. The drivers stamped their feet, wrapped in rugs, their eyes suspicious until Holmes greeted them with the easy courtesy of a man asking nothing more sinister than a timetable. "Affair last night," he began. "Bridewell Mews to Holborn. A lady, veiled, 2 men in haste. Who took that journey?" There was the usual silence of men accustomed to avoiding entanglement, until one, a stout fellow with a red scarf, jerked his thumb at a colleague leaning against a post, pipe glowing between his teeth. "That'd be Grafton. He had a soldier with him, scarred jaw, the kind as keeps to shadows." Holmes crossed in 2 strides. "Grafton, I think you drove a fare worth more than the coin in your pocket." "Tell me of them." The cabman squinted through the smoke. "You pay better than they did?" Holmes produced a sovereign so swiftly that I barely saw the glint before it vanished into the man's palm. "They came out the Mews near midnight," said Grafton. "A lady in white, but muffled, quiet as a lamb. 2 gents, one broad, the other slight, both with hats down. The scarred one gave the orders. Holborn, then east. We rattled through Clerkenwell and turned toward Shoreditch. They alighted by a shuttered warehouse near Bishopsgate. Paid me a half-crown, cheap for the hour. I'd have complained, but the scar looked as if it would answer with a knife." Holmes leaned closer. "The warehouse, what mark had it?" "A sign half torn," said the man. "Rook & Co., dealers in." The rest were gone. Empty place, save for a lamp within. I thought no more of it. Holmes thanked him with another coin, then turned to Lestrade. "Inspector, place men about that warehouse discreetly. We shall not storm until we know which birds roost there." Lestrade grunted assent, though with the look of a man unwilling to yield credit. Holmes and I returned to our cab, and soon we were jolting north through the narrow arteries that led to Bishopsgate. The fog thinned there, drawn up by the great iron chimneys that brooded over warehouses like sentinels. At last we halted before a block of shuttered windows, one of which glowed faintly with a guarded light. The sign hung crooked, its letters Rook & Co. just visible. Holmes crouched in the shadow of a cart and studied the ground. "Barrow wheels again," he murmured. "The same lame rim, but fresh since last night. And footprints, men's boots, heavy. No trace of a lady's tread. If she is here, they carried her." A watchman's whistle shrilled somewhere distant, and we shrank back into the shadows until silence returned. Then Holmes straightened, his eyes alight. "We shall not enter now, Watson. To move too soon is to rouse the bird before the net is spread. Better to learn who owns this roost. Tomorrow we call in daylight under honest names and let them betray themselves by courtesy." We returned to Baker Street, the lamps burning low and Mrs. Hudson startled at our late return. Holmes sank into his chair, his violin across his knees, but he did not play. He stared into the fire as though the flames concealed the missing bride. When at last he spoke, it was to himself. "Pride rehearses, envy arranges, but who profits? Not Miss Armitage, for exposure means ruin. Not Carter, for he lacks ambition. There is a hand yet unseen." I ventured. "Perhaps the scarred soldier?" Holmes shook his head. "He is but another tool. The warehouse speaks of commerce, not passion. A bride is worth more than affection in certain circles. Dowry, inheritance, alliance. These are coins for which men steal more ruthlessly than for gold. The following morning saw us at Bishopsgate, where Lestrade's men had kept vigil through the night. They reported little movement. 2 men entering with crates, no sound of struggle, no glimpse of a woman. Holmes led us to the warehouse door and knocked with the air of a merchant seeking trade. After a pause, the door opened to reveal a tall man in a clerk's coat, spectacles glinting, his face composed but his hands betraying a slight tremor. Holmes presented a card he had scribbled. Mr. Vernon, dealer in rare books. I am told you have storage for hire, he said easily. May I step in? The clerk hesitated, then allowed us through. The interior was dim, stacked with crates marked in chalk. A faint odor lingered, flowers overlaying carbolic. Holmes's nostrils flared. My friend, he said lightly, do you use scent upon your wares? The man blinked. We fumigate against moth. Orris is cheapest. Holmes glanced at me, the smallest gleam in his eye. We wandered among the crates, Holmes pausing once to touch the lid of one where dust had been brushed hastily aside. He said nothing until we emerged once more into the gray daylight. There, Watson. They house her not in chains, but in silence. The Orris betrays them, as surely as the mica did. Tonight we return with more than eyes. The snare is nearly drawn. Lestrade was impatient. Then why not take them now? Because, Holmes answered, we hold yet no proof she is within. To raid without it risks warning them and losing her forever. But with patience, we shall see the true master step into his part. Watch tonight, Inspector. The play is almost at its final act. We parted with that, and as we drove back to Baker Street, I saw Holmes's hand drift once to his pocket where the tired shilling lay. His eyes were fixed not on the London streets but upon some inward stage where the unseen hand moved its pieces. And, though I did not know it then, the next night would bring the revelation he had been shaping since the first footprint ended at the altar. That evening the fog pressed low across Bishopsgate, cloaking the warehouses like a shroud, and the lamps burned with a jaundiced glow. Holmes and I, wrapped against the damp, took our post in a narrow alley opposite the shuttered building of Rook & Co. Lestrade had already stationed his men in pairs, discreet but within hailing distance. The air tasted of coal smoke and the faint sweetness of orris, which seemed to drift even from beneath the warehouse doors, as though mocking us with its persistence. With Holmes crouched at the corner, his eyes fixed upon the faint slice of light visible through a crack in the shutters. He spoke in the lowest of tones. You see, Watson, the orris clings as tenaciously as guilt. A scent is a poor conspirator. It betrays when words would hold. The hours dragged. A watchman passed twice, his lantern casting grotesque shadows against the wall. From within the warehouse came muffled sounds, the scrape of a chair, the low cadence of voices, once the unmistakable clang of a bar against stone. Holmes stiffened at that, and I knew he feared Lady Eugenia might even then be confined behind those walls. At last, a cab drew up, its wheels crunching softly over the stones. A man alighted. Tall, broad-shouldered, the scar upon his jaw plain even in the dim light. Carter's companion. He rapped twice at the door, and it opened to admit him. For a brief moment the interior was revealed. A table with papers strewn, a lamp burning low, and a second figure in silhouette. A figure unmistakably female. The door shut, and the alley returned to darkness. Holmes exhaled, his eyes gleaming. The bait is laid. Now we must wait for the master. It was near midnight when the next arrival came. A private brougham, polished though modest, drawn by a pair of dark horses. From it descended a woman cloaked heavily, her stride purposeful. She lifted her veil just enough to show the pale gleam of her face beneath the lamp, and even from our distance I recognized her, Miss Lydia Armitage. She tapped upon the door, and it swung open without hesitation. She passed within as one in command. Holmes's hand gripped my arm. You perceive it, Watson? Pride does not serve. It rules. She is no pawn, but the conductor of this orchestra. Lestrade shifted beside us, growling, Shall we take them now? Holmes shook his head. Not yet. One more note must be struck. If we move too soon, she will plead innocence. claim she came to entreat or rescue. No, we must hear her speak in her own tongue. We crept closer, hugging the wall until Holmes found a place where the shutter warped and a sliver of vision could be had. He motioned me to look. Within, the lamplight fell upon Miss Armitage as she cast off her cloak. She stood tall, her dark hair pinned severely, her eyes bright with command. Before her, upon a chair, sat Lady Eugenia herself, pale, her white gown soiled, her wrists loosely bound but her head held high. I felt my heart leap, for she was alive. Markham's bride, the vanished lady of the altar, sat in the very den of her disappearance. She was not broken, but defiant, her gaze fixed upon her cousin. "You will release me, Lydia," she said firmly. "This shame will not hold." "On the contrary," Miss Armitage replied, her voice clear, carrying even through the shudder. "You will remain here until you learn what place is yours. You think to inherit father's fortune, to stand as jewel of the family, to marry your hussar and parade through London. But I have labored in silence while you were worshipped. Today was to be your triumph. I chose otherwise." Holmes's fingers tightened on my sleeve, commanding stillness. Within, Lady Eugenia drew herself up. "You envy me, Lydia. That is your crime. No plot will make you loved." "Loved?" The word escaped her cousin like a lash. "I ask not love, but justice. The estate is strained. Father will not see it. By your marriage lands pass, while I, who have steadied this house, am cast aside. If I must fashion a miracle to prevent it, I shall. You vanished before the altar, and you will remain vanished until Captain Markham signs a release of the settlement. Then perhaps you may reappear, widowed of fortune, stripped of triumph." The scarred soldier shifted uneasily at her side. The clerk wrung his hands, but she stood immovable, pride itself embodied. "That is enough," Holmes whispered. "We have the confession. Inspector," now Lestrade signaled his men. In moments the door was forced, the lamplight spilling into the street as shouts broke. Holmes and I rushed in with the first constables. The soldier drew a knife but was struck down. The clerk cowered. Miss Armitage stood frozen, her eyes blazing with something between fury and despair. Holmes went straight to Lady Eugenia, cutting her bonds with a swift movement of his knife. "You are safe, madam. Pray, do not fear." She rose at once, dignity unbroken, and laid a trembling hand upon her cousin's arm. "Lydia, why?" But Miss Armitage only turned her gaze upon Holmes. "You are clever, sir, but you meddle where family affairs should rule." She made no struggle as the constables closed about her. Lord Wrexham arrived not long after, summoned in haste, and when he beheld his daughter unharmed, he wept openly. Markham burst in, his face aflame with anguish and joy, and took Eugenia into his arms. She swayed, but did not faint. Her courage held. Holmes, meanwhile, surveyed the warehouse with a cold satisfaction. "The stage is struck," he said. "Pride has played its part and envy has spoken its line. Now the law will close the curtain." As we returned through the thinning fog toward Baker Street, I could not help but reflect on the strange weaving of pride and envy that had nearly undone a family and ruined a life. Holmes sat silent, his head bowed, until at last he murmured, "Watson, it is ever so. The world believes crime is bred of greed or passion, but I tell you, wounded pride is the sharpest spur of all." And with that, he closed his eyes. The case resolved, though the echo of footsteps at the altar still rang in both our minds. The morning after the raid dawned pale and brittle. The fog lifted, yet leaving London with a damp chill that seemed reluctant to depart. Holmes had not slept. I found him at the window of Baker Street, his profile sharp against the weak light. The tired shilling balanced between his fingers as if it were a coin still to be wagered. "They have her under guard at Holloway," I told him, for Lestrade had brought word an hour before. Miss Armitage shows no contrition, only composure. She insists it was no crime, but an act of preservation for her family's honor. Holmes gave a low hum, as if the sentiment confirmed rather than surprised. "Pride will call ruin honor until the end, Watson. She rehearsed her play too well to break character now. And Lady Eugenia?" I asked, at Wrexham House, watched by her father and Markham both. Yet Holmes's eyes remained distant, his fingers still turning the coin. It was not until Mrs. Hudson entered with the post that his gaze sharpened. Among the ordinary envelopes lay a card, sealed with a smear of violet wax. Holmes broke it with a flick of his thumb. It bore but a line in a cramped hand. "The curtain is not down. Beware Rook & Co." I stared. "Then there is another hand still?" Holmes's mouth curved faintly. "Precisely. Miss Armitage believed herself director of the play, but she was not author. The warehouse was no mere hiding place. It was stage and snare alike. Consider the scarred soldier, the clerk, the crates marked with chalk. They were too neat, too ready. Miss Armitage supplied motive and rehearsal, but someone else provided means." He turned, coat already in hand. "Come, Watson. We must visit Bishopsgate once more before the stage is struck and cleared." By noon, we stood again before the shuttered doors of Rook & Co. The constable posted there saluted and admitted us. Within, the place was altered. The lamp and chair were gone, the table cleared. Only the smell of orris lingered, sweet and cloying. Holmes moved swiftly among the crates, his long fingers brushing dust, pausing at seams. At one stack he halted, drawing from his pocket a small penknife. With a quick motion he prized open the lid. Inside lay not goods but a hollow filled with paper, ledgers, contracts, bonds. Holmes rifled them with eager precision, his eyes darting like a falcon's. At last he held one aloft. "Here, Watson, read. It was a deed of settlement, the Wrexham estates named within. But the signatures were forged. Lord Wrexham's hand imitated clumsily, Captain Markham's more deftly. A scheme to divert inheritance, cloaked as legal transfer." Holmes's voice cut the silence. "Here lies the unseen hand. While Miss Armitage staged her miracle, others prepared to secure fortune by fraud. Her pride blinded her to their theft. She was their accomplice and their pawn, both." A footstep sounded at the door. Lestrade entered, hat in hand, his face flushed. "We have traced the clerk, Mr. Holmes. His name is John Ellison, once a solicitor's apprentice, struck off for forgery. He denies nothing but names no master." Holmes gave a thin smile. "He will not name him, for the master has not yet revealed himself. But he will. Pride and envy are loud, but greed whispers until it thinks itself safe. He replaced the ledger, closed the crate, and dusted his hands. "We shall not wait for him here. We shall let him come to us. Watson, fetch Lord Wrexham and his daughter to Baker Street tonight. Inspector, bring the groom as well. The author of this play will not resist the temptation of an audience." That evening, the sitting room was more crowded than I had ever seen it. Lord Wrexham sat rigid, his daughter pale yet resolute beside him. Markham paced like a caged hound. Lestrade occupied the hearth, restless. Holmes alone seemed at ease, stretched in his chair, fingertips pressed together. On the table lay the forged deed, the tired shilling, the fragment of card, each a silent witness. At the stroke of 9, Mrs. Hudson opened the door and announced a visitor. A gentleman entered, well-dressed, middle years, with the confidence of one used to command. I knew him at once, though I had only glimpsed him once before, Lord Wrexham's steward, Mr. Hale, whose quiet presence at earlier interviews had seemed unremarkable. He paused as his eyes fell upon the array upon the table. His composure faltered, only for a breath, but Holmes had seen it. "Pray be seated, Mr. Hale. We are but waiting for the final act." The steward attempted a laugh. "Surely, Mr. Holmes, this is some misapprehension. I serve my lord faithfully." Holmes's eyes glittered. "Faithfully? You rented the warehouse under another name. You placed Ellison there, you recruited the soldier Carter. You supplied the wax, the orris, the powders. Purchased by a maid you bribed to serve Miss Armitage. You played upon her pride, knowing she would scheme but blind to your greater design. While she removed the bride, you prepared to remove the fortune. Had we not found the forged deed, you might have succeeded." Lord Wrexham leapt to his feet. "Hale, is this true?" The steward's mask broke. He sprang toward the door, but Lestrade was quicker, seizing him by the arm. Papers spilled from Hale's coat as he struggled. fresh drafts, bonds ready to be signed once the marriage was annulled. Holmes rose, his tone almost weary. "There is your author, Watson. Miss Armitage composed a play of pride, but Hale wrote the tragedy of greed." Lady Eugenia's voice was steady as she spoke. "And what part did I play?" Holmes looked at her with rare gentleness. "You were the coin all sought to spend, madam. But you are safe, and no man shall pass you like property." The room fell silent, broken only by Hale's muttered curses as Lestrade's men bore him away. Lord Wrexham, his face gray, bowed his head in grief and shame. Markham took his bride's hand, and though his voice shook, he vowed she should never again be pawn in another's game. When at last the house emptied and quiet returned, I found Holmes at the window once more, the city stretching dark beyond. He held the tired shilling once again, turning it so that the worn date caught the light. "A small coin, Watson," he murmured. Yet it bought us truth. Pride rehearsed, envy played, greed wrote. But in the end, the smallest clue sets the stage for revelation. He set the coin upon the mantel, where it gleamed dull and weary. Another case closed, another curtain fallen, though the echo of footsteps at the altar lingered in my mind long after the night had ended. Holmes allowed the fire to sink into embers before he spoke again, his long figure drawn into stillness as though the storm of the case had passed through him and left only calm. Lord Wrexham had departed with his daughter and the shaken captain, Lestrade trundling the captured steward into the custody of the yard. Only we two remained, the weary quiet of Baker Street settling about us like a benediction after the thunder of revelations. "You perceive it, Watson," he said at last, "that no single hand wrought the disappearance. Pride gave the play its actor, envy lent its cue, and greed provided its scenery. Each alone was a weak note, but struck together they composed a harmony fit to deceive an audience of hundreds. Miss Armitage would have been content with humiliation, but Hale thought of estates, annuities, fortunes moving quietly into his own pocket. The one rehearsed a miracle, the other a theft. I nodded, recalling the pale defiance of Eugenia and the venom of her cousin's speech. "Yet she lives, Holmes. Pride and greed may gnash, but her courage endured." Holmes's thin smile flickered. "Indeed. She is of that metal which does not bend easily. I fancy marriage to her hussar will be a partnership of equals, though the man may not yet know it. As for Miss Armitage, she will face trial, but I suspect her punishment will be lighter than her disgrace. Pride cannot live long in the shadow of a cell. Hale will not be so fortunate. His papers alone would hang him twice over." He rose and paced, restless energy not yet spent. "I find it instructive, Watson, how trifles betrayed the truth. A smear of violet wax upon an altar rail, a grain of mica upon a verger's glove, the tired date on a shilling, all threads too slight for the eye of common sense. Yet when woven together, they bound the play like iron bands. Without them, we might still be staring at a vanished bride and whispering of miracles." "You never believed in a miracle." "Holmes," I said. He paused, the light of the fire glancing along his sharp profile. "No, the world is rich enough in contrivance without borrowing from heaven. A footprint that ends upon stone does not speak of angels, but of cunning hands and rehearsed deceit. And yet," he turned back to the fire, his tone softening, "there is one miracle I allow myself to acknowledge, the resilience of the human heart. Lady Eugenia stood against fear with more poise than many a soldier. That, Watson, I cannot deduce. I can only admire." We sat together in companionable silence, the ticking of the clock filling the room. At length Holmes drew his violin to his chin and set the bow lightly across the strings. A low, contemplative air rose, winding through the room like smoke, as if he gave music to the remnants of pride, envy, and greed that still lingered in thought. I watched him, knowing that his mind had already half turned to some other enigma waiting in the labyrinth of London. At last he set down the instrument. Another case concluded, another snare untangled. Tomorrow the city will bustle as though no bride had ever vanished, no altar had ever lied. But for us, Watson, The echo of those footsteps will remain, footsteps that ended at the altar, and yet led us into the darker corridors of the human soul, and with that he dismissed the matter, reaching for his pipe with the indifference of a man who has stripped mystery of its garments and left it naked to reason. The world might speak of miracles, but I knew better. Sherlock Holmes had once again shown that logic, patience, and the smallest of clues could shatter the grandest of illusions.